Hello, everybody. Adam Parks here with a Receivables Info webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about decoding voice AI, the application of voice technology, artificial intelligence, and what that intersection looks like. So this will be a fun conversation today because I get to do it with two friends. One, we've got Scott Carroll with skit.ai, who is focused on selling products in that space. And we also have the world famous Mr. Mark Need with need.edu here to talk to us and provide us with some perspective based on his side of the world, including consulting, being the past CEO of ACA International, and just having a lot of experience from around the industry. So before we get started, gentlemen, Scott, maybe we could start with you, but could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Sure, absolutely. Well, it all started about 30 years ago when I became a debt collector at an agency, and I enjoyed it so well that I decided to stay in it. Over the years, I've then got into management actually early on, and over the years, I ended up serving on the creditor side as well as the agency side, more so on the agency side, and I've very much enjoyed all of the strategy and the compliance and the complications that come with a collection agency. I just really enjoy it. So I've stayed in it. And then ultimately I saw this technology coming into our industry and thought this would really be terrific to be a part of, to help it further come into the industry experience, to be a tool in the belt. So I'm really excited to be here and be a part of it all.
Awesome. Mark, I just got a note from someone that your camera is not showing. Could you try clicking the camera off and back on button in the center of the screen?
Sure. How about that?
We'll find out in just a moment. Well, we're finding out.
I can see myself.
Yeah.
Okay.
At least it's not shown for one guest. If anybody else has an issue seeing one of us or any questions they'd like to ask, you can leave those in the chat as well. And I do have the chat open so that I can respond to those as well. But in the short term, Mark, you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you get to the seat that you're in today?
Sure, happy to. Welcome. Good to be here. First of all, I'd say I have a voice made for radio, so if you can't see me, it's probably a good day you're having. But listen, I've been in the industry for about 25 years. I'm a CPA by background and took that fateful jump out of public accounting to be the CFO for a small debt collection company many, many years ago. And all of a sudden found myself owning an agency for over 20 years and sold it a few years ago. Started to do some consulting and eventually ended up as CEO of ACA International. So I'm probably one of the rare people in this industry who's never really collected a debt, even though I've spent almost 30 years in the business. So take that for what it is. But these days I consider myself a free agent. I've been doing a little consulting work, but mostly working on my golf handicap.
And how's that going?
Surprisingly, it's not bad. But you'd think with as much golf as I play, I'd be better.
Fair enough. No, fair enough. It looks like we're still having trouble with you being seen. I'm not sure. I can see you on my side. So hopefully you're showing up in the final.
Well, I have a full gig of internet in my house, so I don't know what the issue would be on my end.
Well, try cutting the camera off and on one more time. We'll see if that works. Otherwise, we're just going to continue forward. Okay. But as we kind of talk about video, or as we talk about video, now I'm all thrown off. As we talk about voice AI and kind of what's going on from a technology standpoint, let's talk a little bit about some of the current trends that we're seeing, in terms of collection agencies executing on technology or leveraging technology to improve their efficiencies. Because clearly we've seen this shift from the manual smile and dial telephone stuff, and we've seen an investment into a variety of different areas of technology, whether that be through efficiencies or communication channels. But what are you kind of seeing out there, Mark, in terms of what are the current trends that you're starting to see?
Well, I've done a lot of speaking on this topic over the past year, and it's interesting because I think collection agencies right now are kind of caught between two worlds. One world is all of the legacy systems that they have and that may or may not be paid for yet. And also legacy business strategies. I mean, these days, I think live conversations are still omnipotent to debt collectors. And yet, when we start to look out a ways, let's compare today to 5 years out. I think agencies realize that they're having, and they have been having, a difficult time finding enough employees. And so I think that has spurred them now. I mean, most people, myself included, don't change until the cost of not changing is greater than the cost of changing. And I think as we see staffing issues really continue throughout the industry, that agency owners realize the days of yesterday are gone. And so how do I, what kind of bridges are there to get me to where I think I need to be 5 years from now? And so I think automation and technology, they're there for the use, they're there for the taking right now, but they're probably still a little bit of reticence on the part of agencies because they've invested in technologies that they're kind of married to, and no one likes to spend more money than they have to, and everybody likes a big bottom line. And so I think that people are a little bit conflicted. How do I get to where I need to be 5 years from now without ripping the Band-Aid off all at once?
Well, margins have been tight, right? And so with margins tightening, we have to find opportunities for efficiencies to grow our businesses. We can't, there's this relationship in terms of growth of our organizations. And when we talk about collection agencies, and I found this in a number of different labor-based businesses, but as you start to have this increase in the volume of accounts that you're working, for example, you're also going to have this variable increase in the number of people that you have to have on the floor. So even though you're growing your organization and the numbers are getting greater, you're still on this same correlation of rising of both your revenues and your expenses simultaneously, because you require that variable expense of the people in order to drive that revenue. So one of the things that you start to look for is these efficiencies in your technology to kind of kick those and improve them. Now, Scott, you spent most of your career on the agency side, and clearly you found a home over at skit.ai. Talk to me a little bit about what you saw that kind of drove that type of a life decision for you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. After spending so much time on the agency side, and then, in my previous employment was there for 18 years. And I made the jump because when I saw this technology, a lot of people like to say the future is now and the future is coming, or whatever they like to say, and the future is here, right? And so I saw the technology and I thought to myself, this is an industry that does really well at grasping technology, but slowly sometimes, right? So sometimes we grab the technology and we run with it. There are some that run with it quickly. There's some that are slower to adapt. And then there are some that are pretty reticent about it. They just don't want to adapt so quickly. They want to see other people do it. So when I saw the technology and understood that the company was focusing solely on the debt collection industry. So we're not talking about customer service. We're not talking about, other use cases. We're talking about debt collections. And I thought, wow, this is really, how terrific is that? There's a vendor that wants to uniquely focus on one sector, and that's it. And that's what skit.ai offered. And that's why I jumped. I was interested in being a part of that technology as it goes. We've had other changes in the industry, right? Other technology advances and things that they've been around a while. Texting and email has been around for a while, but the industry has slowly adapted. And I'm seeing a lot of folks who haven't really switched over even to that phase. But you've got agencies that are ready for the next steps, and that's what conversational AI offers.
So I think that that's an interesting point of view, because I agree. I think that, organizations, when we talk about the investment in technology, I think what people fail to realize is that the investment is not just dollars and cents. It's not just how many dollars am I going to throw at improving this technology or buying this thing and plugging it in. Right. It's about developing the partnerships with those technology companies to refine and tweak that platform for your specific purposes into the future. And I think as we look at the regulatory obligations or the regulatory framework that has changed through the years, let's look at Reg F, for example. There was a handful of agencies that were really focused on text and email when there was still legal ambiguity around the use of those communication channels. Because prior to Reg F, we were still operating under FDCPA, as that sole guidance, and having that be older than me. I wasn't born yet when the FDCPA was written. So clearly it was not covering the level of technology changes that have happened, because just looking in my own lifetime and going from literally from a rotary phone to, the latest and greatest iPhones is a massive leap in technology. And so I think part of what I saw was people started running so quickly towards the open door, right? The door got opened a little bit. Everybody went rushing through, but they didn't look around when they entered the next room, right? They didn't look around and say, okay, well, where else can I apply this technology? What other channels? And so I feel like voice kind of got a little left behind because people were looking for the next latest and greatest thing instead of perfecting the craft that they already had. Right. And so for me, I've been looking at this whole thing going down. And part of the reason I was interested in doing this webinar was that people aren't like, we're talking about all of these upgrades and technology and how can we make things better. But we need to also look at those things that already do work for us, and how can we improve on those things that are already working before we start trying to run down so many other paths. Because I also think that the challenges that we're going to see in the voice area are going to be similar to what we see. What's the biggest challenge that I see when it comes to digital communications, being text and email? Deliverability. Right. But now from a voice perspective, we're having some of those same things when it comes to outbounding, because I don't know about you guys, but I've got RoboKiller on my phone to block the 25 spam messages or phone calls that I get between 2 and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a daily basis, and clearly being spun off the same dialer. But I think those of us that are legitimately making those outbound calls are going to face similar challenges, which I'm hoping are things that we're going to get to talk about a little bit today, because I think that understanding the train tracks is important, right? Like, how are we communicating? But then what does our locomotive look like? And what cars are we putting on the train, being our individual communication methodologies, our individual communications that we're trying to send on this channel down this particular track. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how things continue to evolve in both the digital and the voice space. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for further perfecting our craft when it comes to voice.
Adam, I think it's human nature to look for the panacea in almost every aspect of our lives.
Sure.
Right. And so I view, conversational AI as a tool in a toolbox or a car on a train track. And if you take a big portfolio, let's say I buy 150,000 accounts in their utility bills. Those consumers are not all the same. They don't all want to be approached the same. And so, whether it's conversational AI, whether it's just more rudimentary type chatbots, whether it's text messaging, old-fashioned phone calls, ringless voicemail. I think every portfolio has within it strata of accounts that are best dealt with different types of technology. And I think the trick for agencies is twofold. Number one, to accept that as reality. And then number two, to go to work and try to understand their portfolios better and segment their portfolios in ways that are most advantageous based on each of those different types of technologies that are available, so that there isn't a one size fits all approach.
Well, I think that comes back to the debate between omni-channel and opti-channel, right? And so omni-channel being able to carry that context across any communication channel and to be able to bounce between communication channels, but opti-channel being identifying the right communication channel for the right person at the right time. And that, I think, is where voice is going to start to play an even more important role, is being able to understand when that person is best communicated with through a voice channel versus a textual channel.
Yeah, Adam, when Mark was speaking, and then you know, I wrote the word balance. I'm kind of old fashioned. I still write things down so I don't forget what I'm going to say in 1 minute. I wrote down balance, and you're right. It's about balance. And when it comes to a strategy, the thing is, we've always had voice. Voice has been what we've always had in the industry. And then we had other technologies come in, and they're fine and good and dandy, and we need those. But at the end of the day, we still had voice. That's what got us where we are now. And it hasn't gone away. We're now just augmenting it, making it something different and better.
And we all have those individual experiences in life where we're trying to change flights or do something important. And we're like, is the app really understanding this, or do I need to get on the phone? Right. And so for me, like, can I function this? And I know, Mark, you're a traveler like I am, and I'm probably fighting with whatever your preferred airline's mobile app is. But that's the kind of thing that I've seen through the years, is like, there is this, like, voice has a place in the communication spectrum. And it's about refining that, right? Both from an incoming and an outbound standpoint, which I think brings us to some interesting topics as we continue to go through our discussion today. But like optimizing the voice channel. So now we're saying that, you know, voice is one of those important aspects of the collections cycle. Well, what is the importance of voice, other than it's what we know? But if you look at this 150,000 accounts in a utility portfolio, for example, you may be able to start to determine some of the importance of voice by looking at the demographics of that portfolio, right? You're going to have different age brackets that have different communication preferences, and not every debt is owed by someone who's, you know, in the youngest generations. So I think being able to better understand that, you know, what do you see as the importance of voice in the construct of a collection agency?
Boy, Adam, I'm one of the old people, right? So I still like phone calls. I just have this belief, and I may be proven wrong. You guys like Elon Musk out there, who knows what rock they're going to roll over next. But I still feel, and you know, when I talked earlier about agencies not having enough staff, and particularly if they're trying to grow, I think it's important going forward that we take the bell curve of issues that people tend to have with their bad debts, and somehow use automation and technology to respond to the top 20 questions you hear every day from a consumer, for example. But the importance of voice comes in when you get to the both tails of that bell curve. The kinds of situations that require a live agent that aren't as easy as just a self-serve platform. And so I think it's a both and instead of a either or. And then secondly, I would add that not every consumer out there is so self-serve that they don't need influence. And so a live human being can influence, can add emotion to a conversation that might cause a consumer to rethink what they thought when they first got the contact or made contact or initiated an inbound call, for example. So I don't know that we'll ever be able to replace the human emotion, but I won't say never, because that's a long time.
Well, and I think the staffing issue that you brought up is incredibly important, because it is so hard to hire people right now. And you have to start coming to these like measurements internally for your own organization. If I can't get people hired here in Port St. Lucie, Florida, where am I going to hire them? Right? Am I going to hire them overseas? Am I going to start to train, you know, technology to learn? Because let's be perfectly honest, like AI takes time to learn. So artificial intelligence as a solution, I think is a wave of the future. But it does take some time to get things rolling, which I find to be interesting, Scott, based on some of the stuff that you're working with, like being focused on training one thing. I've seen other voice organizations or voice AI companies enter this space, but this wasn't the space, right? They're customer service organizations that are trying to apply customer service logic to debt collection, which works on some level or might work for BPOs. But what have you seen in terms of differentiation of being part of an organization whose AI is specifically honed in on one particular industry, being the unique debt collection industry.
I've seen it's been quite interesting, really. The agencies that we speak with first of all, they appreciate that we have someone on staff, in the company who understands debt collection. That's something that I've noticed has been remarkable. From their perspective, they're glad to see that. The conversations we have in debt collections are not really similar to the conversations that are happening in customer service. It's not a customer service moment. You want it to be a good customer experience, but the scripting is certainly different. And we've got regulations, obviously, that we've got to follow, and we're sure to do that. What we're looking to do here is to mimic the same scripting that a collection agent would use in that particular agency. And that's the problem we're looking to solve for, is to help with that scalability and to answer, there's real, you said it earlier about the challenge of getting people. That's the top pain point in my experience as we talk to agencies. That's the top pain point, and that's something that they very much look to solve for.
I think there's another aspect of staffing too that we can't overlook, and that is the ever increasing cost of staffing. So out of, and I'm stating the obvious here, but out of necessity, I think it's important that we give our debt collection staffs greater and greater responsibility and expectations commensurate with what they're earning. So, 10 years ago, if you were paying a debt collector $10 an hour and you threw a new portfolio at the staff, everything got worked the same and you worked it all the same way. And you can't do that anymore because now those people are $25 or $30 an hour fully loaded. So that necessitates higher level and higher complexity work being done by those people, which in turn then makes the less, I don't know, valuable is the right term, but the less valuable work being done by machines or some automated fashion.
Well, I think I think you're saying it the right way. It's the less complex work, right? Like if it doesn't require a human to do it, do you need a human to do it?
Yeah, I mean, all day long, if all I'm hearing is people say, I think I paid that bill. Okay. I don't want to pay somebody $30 an hour to answer that statement over and over and over.
Oh, exactly.
Right.
Well, that, and I think when it comes to voice AI, there's a compliance item there too, because like we say, the future is now. And compliance is here. Compliance is now table stakes, right? Like I was talking to a creditor recently who literally told me if there's more than 2 slides in your deck related to compliance, the conversation is ended, because that is the table stakes now, and it is the expectation. It's no longer something you can use to differentiate yourself. It's expected if you're at the table that you have that in place, right? Like that's just the expectation these days. And so I find it to be interesting as to the application of artificial intelligence into that voice channel, because from a compliance perspective, you're reducing your risk levels when your model is trained to deal with these types of things, because it's not going to break script. It's not going to have a bad day. It's not going to get frustrated. It's going to just run programmed, right? Like that's its job. And I don't want to go all short circuit Johnny 5 here, but it just runs programmed. And I find that to be an upside from someone who has spent, the last 10 years overseeing compliance at a number of different organizations, because to what end, right? Like when you can leverage that artificial intelligence and it can be responding in a consistent way, I think that it provides you with some really interesting opportunities. I'm curious and we could talk a little bit more from it. When we talk about artificial intelligence, one of the things that I'll say, I did find, and I put it there to put in a quote from Clara. So I'm going to slide here for a second. But if you haven't read it, at DCS last year, their keynote speaker had written the book Decoding Decoding AI in Financial Services, which I think provides a really good baseline for anybody who's trying to understand what is AI and how is it being used across the industry, what kind of rules and safeguards are being built in and put into place. And I think that there's some really interesting things. I know we're going to talk a little bit about chat GDP and the Dan command and stuff as we go a little bit further down here, but artificial intelligence to me is providing some interesting opportunities, but it's also providing some things that we need to consciously think about prior to deploying something like this. So, when we talk about what can I get or why should I deploy that AI here, it's the scalability and the reach of efficiency, right? You're able to scale up this call volume in a significant way while maintaining or achieving a new level of efficiency on your phone calls. Now, are you guys finding that to be the case once you've seen voice? I mean, this is my kind of hypothesis, but is this the same thing that you've been seeing as it's been deployed with organizations?
Absolutely right. Yep, you've hit the nail on the head. Yeah. So there's so much more to optimizing voice, right? You optimize voice, you're optimizing your other channels as well. And when you're working to focus on one thing to optimize, your other avenues are also getting optimized. So you kind of go along. So you optimize your voice. Then, so for example, you may find that you are reallocating resources, right?
Mhm.
So like you mentioned earlier, you might use this technology on maybe lower yielding return accounts, for example. And then you could reallocate your resources internally and have some of your top collectors working on your top accounts. I mean, this industry is not short on strategy and creativity, so they can certainly take it and run with it their way. But I think when you optimize one side, you're automatically going to shift to optimizing your other channels. And that's what I'm seeing.
Well, I think reallocation of that staff is good too, but let's talk about the consistency that it provides,
Huge.
right? So if the AI is responding to the same, like you were talking about, Mark, if the same question's being asked over and over again, not only can we provide a consistent response, but we can refine that response based on the results that we see. So if I'm getting the same question 100 times and I give slightly modified answers on 50% of those, I'm going to have a better understanding of which of these two responses is the better response given the scenario or the situation in play. So I'm curious to see how that starts to unfold across the space as that content continues to be tweaked. I know from a digital communication standpoint, we're A/B testing content, right? Text messages, written communications, the same way that you would test advertising, for example, right? You've got 100 people looking at it, 50 of them see this, 50 of them see this. What were the results that were achieved? And the same thing is happening from a voice perspective, right? You can slightly modify that message to a portion of your audience, and it would enable you to better understand which communications or what language is most effective given a specific scenario.
Well, I think you just hit something that's really important, Adam, and that is you don't just turn this stuff on and forget about it. You've got to be listening. You've got to know what consumers are saying. Otherwise, you could have technology that's somewhat run amok at worst, and at best, you may miss some opportunities to tweak your scripting and the ways in which that technology is responding to consumer, because you haven't really paid close attention to what the consumer is really saying.
Absolutely agreed, which brings us to the big question about AI that always comes up from a compliance standpoint, and that's the black box. And so, look, when a machine is making a decision, sometimes it's not easy to unravel the decision that the machine made, but it's generally going to be based on those models. So understanding those models and having specialized models where the AI or the machine learning algorithms are ultimately learning and making decisions based on previous actions in order to predict the future, that's great. But come the compliance audit time, when you have to explain something to them, what does that process look like for you guys as you've been through the process of being audited with AI technology in your application stack? Have you guys seen, have you guys been through any of these, audits with whether it be a creditor coming in and trying to understand why you're making the decisions that you're making?
Scott, I'll let you handle that first. I've got some thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. So far so good. So, it's like you said, so it's extremely compliant. The information that you put into it, it's fixed information. there are some data points that are variables, but for the most part, it's fixed, right? And based on the consumer response, then the bot will go accordingly, right, in the conversation. All of that is entirely auditable and hasn't presented any problem for any type of audit so far.
Interesting. And from a voice perspective, I could understand that because it's an if this then that statement.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't necessarily need to make a conclusion. It only needs to measure the response and figure out which path to put it on,
Right.
which actually makes a lot of sense from a voice perspective if you're not using the AI for scoring and other things. Mark, I know you have some thoughts on this.
Well, I've got a couple that just popped at mind right away. First of all is I think if I was an agency owner, I'd want some kind of a hold harmless with my vendor provider, because if their machine, goes off the rails, I just don't feel like it should be my responsibility. And so I'd probably want some indemnification language in a contract there. But I think that's just good, sound business. I think when we get to conversational AI, and as we have systems that are learning systems, I think we're going to have to keep a close eye on things, because I tested one out about a year ago, and I was doing some work for somebody, and I just threw that person's name out and asked the bot, hey, do you know so-and-so? What do you know about him? And the machine went off and said, well, I know that he's worth about $500,000, which is a great sum of money. And he didn't go to college. Well, it turned out that none of that was accurate. And so if I was a regulator, I'd be concerned that machines can just take on a life of their own. And so having them controlled is going to be, I think, really, really important to the regulators. And so we're probably entering a whole new realm here of where regulatory oversight in the future will look different than it has in the past, because you can no longer walk out to someone's desk and ask them, why'd you say that? Or did you say that?
Right.
Well, and that is the good thing, and with this type of product, it doesn't go off script, right? So it doesn't matter. Your collector could come in and have had, a bad day just on the ride to work, right? Or they could respond to profanity in a way you don't want them to respond. Any of those things can happen. That doesn't happen with conversational AI, and that's the good thing. It doesn't take on its life and start going off the rails. I like the train analogy. I like that a lot.
Well, we're going to come back to that one too when we talk about ChatGPT and the Dan command.
For sure.
The other thing that I wanted to talk about when it came to the difference between AI and voice AI was availability. And so I think when it comes to the availability, like our call centers are only open certain hours, right? But chatbots and voice AI works forever. So I find it to be interesting to enable our organizations to work around the clock without putting people in harm's way of figuring those things out. So I think it's interesting to see how some of this is going to start to come together over time and find new and interesting opportunities for us to expand that economies of scope. I look at the availability problem similar to the way that I look at McDonald's serving breakfast, right? And in the 80s, McDonald's sold lunch and dinner and no breakfast. Well, why do they sell breakfast now? Economies of scope. They already have a kitchen. They already have a staff. They've already licenses and food prep and everything else. Like, why not open the doors for that period, for that additional period of time, and provide more opportunity to sell? So I think that economies of scope is something that is going to become more important for our industry over time, because you've got a new generation of consumers or account holders that are doing things late at night. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I like pre-schedule my midnight emails to go out in the morning so I don't look crazy. But it doesn't mean that I'm not plugged in and getting things done at, weird hours of the day. And I think that a lot of people are like that. I think that it's a generational thing, and you're going to find more people looking for that availability for assistance at various hours. So I'm curious to see how that unfolds over time.
That actually has been another concern for agencies, seeing if they could address a consumer around the clock. And that's something we can offer that.
I think it's the around the clock thing is definitely important. But let's talk a little bit more about the AI, solutions versus the live agents, and kind of what that means in terms of cost accuracy and efficiency. But Scott, from your perspective, how are these two worlds different, the live agent and the AI?
Well, live agent, as we kind of already have said, there are a lot of variables with a live agent. With AI, there are a lot more that's fixed to the outcome, right? So it's not always predictable, right? Because the hardest thing to do in collections is to get someone on the phone. But that is, that's what we're offering. And that's,
being able to get that person on the phone. I think when we talk about the live agent and the AI, I think that we go back to that consistency and the accuracy and making sure that we're getting that same response to that same question each time, and we're learning how to optimize it. Now, how many years does it take for a live person to learn that? Right. Whereas when we're leveraging the computers and the algorithms, we can start to do that. And to be perfectly frank, what I've seen in terms of natural language processing power that has evolved over the last, call it 3 to 5 years, has been absolutely phenomenal. Not to mention all the voice products that you see coming out into the space, but even just looking at each one of the cloud computing platforms like Azure, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, or Amazon AWS, they all have some natural language processing power. And I feel like those engines are getting better and better to understand not only the discussion that's being had, but the context of that discussion, because saying something, making a statement and making a statement with context are two very different things. And the AI not only has to make statements, but it has to listen and understand. And I think that understand part has changed dramatically over the past few years as we talk about contextual filtering. Because when I can put something in the context in which it exists, I can be far more accurate in that response. And each time, I'm assuming as a consumer, that each time that I'm interacting with a bot and I'm not getting to where I want to go, that my frustration level is rising over time. And so if I can have the machine better understand the context in which I'm asking a question or looking for a next action, it would improve my odds of not being frustrated, completing a transaction, and moving on with my day. Does that sound like a accurate assessment?
It does. It's listening for intent, the intent of the consumer. So little known secret is I actually went to school and became a linguist. So I got my degree in linguistics. Then I became a bill collector. But yeah, natural flow, right?
Sure.
And so it's quite interesting because then now I'm using something from a very long time ago. But to understand it, it's about the intent, right? What's the way that we've always communicated is verbally, right? Going all the way back to whenever it all started, and how we communicate and the intent behind the words that we use is extremely important. Well, that's what the AI is doing. It's listening for the intent. So the listening portion that you referred to is exactly right. It's listening for that intent. So someone can say no, or they can say or they can say nah, and it's understanding that intent behind it. And then also on the delivery side of the AI, the voice, there's intonation now coming from the bot itself. So that's seeming more realistic, right, to the end user. And
with your linguistics background, it's interesting that you find yourself down this role, because what is a good bill collector? A good bill collector is a good communicator.
Right.
And I think that often we lose track of the language that we're using. Like my girlfriend is Brazilian, and so her natural language is Portuguese. And as we've conversed through the years, obviously it's improving over time. But I often find myself, using slang or language that is not learned from a book, and you have to find that intent behind it, right? I have to find what what am I actually trying to communicate here? Or if you even stop and try to re-explain yourself, right? And you have to really think through the context of that language and the intent behind it. It really has kind of changed my way of looking at language on the whole. Just because it's common to us or it's something that we use every day does not mean that someone who is not even in our region of the country or someone who doesn't speak our language or a computer is going to truly understand it. Now, out of curiosity here, one of the other things is about how are they complementary? And I think when we talk about AI and live agents, that there's this conception that like, oh, you need this or that. But I don't see that as the case, right? How do you guys look at it?
I'm listening to Scott talk and I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how many conversations I've had with people recently that weren't people. Because every
depends
once
on
in
your
a
favorite
while,
airline.
well, yeah. I mean, every once in a while, a call goes almost too perfectly, and I think to myself afterwards, huh, and so I think as this technology gets better and better, we're not going to be able to tell the difference. Now, you mentioned earlier, Adam, that if you're on a call and you start to feel like you're not getting your needs served and your level of attention starts to go up, and that's when I say agent, and I just stop the presses. I need an agent, but I think those incidences will become fewer and fewer over time as this technology becomes has more ability to learn intent and voice inflection and things that don't sound like it's regimented as much, and which makes me just wonder how many times have I been fooled already and didn't even know it. When you talk about, go ahead.
I was going to get the question is, are you being fooled or are you just getting good customer service?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, both probably, but the more I'm getting good customer service, the less I care that I've been fooled. Right? In fact, I mean, how many times have any of us on listening to this podcast or on this call gotten into an hour-long back and forth text conversation, for example, that could have been solved in 60 seconds if we just had someone to talk to, or maybe now something to talk to? It's so much more difficult when you're typing back and forth. It reminds me of at ACA conventions when the delegation from South Korea comes every year, we would have a luncheon with the South Koreans, and there were interpreters in the room. And it took an hour to have a 5-minute conversation. That's how some of this technology feels today, but I know it's going to get a lot better, especially on the voice side.
We have the 3-message rule. If there's 3 emails or 3 text messages talking about the same thing, it's time for a phone call. And so that's the way that we treat, and that's internally, but keep in mind, gentlemen, that I don't have anybody in my office anymore, right? Like pre-COVID, we had a lot of people in the office. Now it's literally just me because my entire team is remote. And so with everybody being remote, we started with a lot of chats and emails and things. And now we have a rule. If it's more than 3 messages and we're not being clear, or if it's going to require a dissertation to be written, it's time for a phone call. And so I think organizations have to find that. But when you're dealing with consumers, you don't have that same privilege, right? That's an internal company to company or internal within my company kind of message and rule. And I do try to follow that through if I'm getting text messages or whatever from a colleague or a client or whatever, so that those things are getting those appropriate responses. But I think it's interesting to see how this is going to continue to evolve because we're starting to find different levels of efficiencies within the use of AI. And I think specifically within the use of AI on voice in terms of where can we find those challenges and improve on those challenges. And so, Scott, I know one of the things that we've talked about here is about some of the efficiencies that you've been able to add to the application stack of a particular agency when deploying voice technology. What are you seeing? And is this list an accurate representation of what you're seeing?
Oh, absolutely. In terms of the efficiencies, yeah, right party contact, handling the inbound calls, which are golden, right? An agency does everything they can to drive an inbound call. You send a letter because you have to, but you also are hoping that it will drive an inbound call. You're texting out a message because you're hoping you'll get an inbound call. It's the same thing here. You're working on that, and then this can handle the inbound or the outbound calls. So then you've got additional efficiencies there, right? So this is handling all that for you, and there's a real seamlessness to it, right? If something got too complicated, it can go to somebody that can handle it.
So this brings up an interesting question for me when we talk about that incoming call management, right? Like incoming calls to a debt collector, that's the bread and butter. But it also is, you end up paying commissions to a collector, assuming that that's your structure. But you're paying individual commissions to a collector to field those inbound calls. I'm assuming that you're finding cost savings in leveraging artificial intelligence in that kind of voice AI application there in order to reduce the cost to collect those dollars that you already spent money to generate the incoming call.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So that's an eyebrow raiser when we're speaking with agencies about that. And, that's that moment that they recognize that that's a hitting point. And that means a lot, right? Because fee is crushing right now from creditors. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's crushing.
Sure.
We got buyers, and that's getting harder. The yield is getting thinner. The workforce is, we already talked about that. It's pretty scarce. And so the technology really helps to lift in so many different areas.
It's an interesting approach. It's not something that I considered previously, but that is, that's something that we've been tasked as a consultant with fixing in the past, is like, how can I reduce the cost of getting these payments in that I've already spent so much money generating these payments, whether that be through text messages, emails, marketing campaigns, letters, right? Like all of these different communication channels that we can leverage, or ultimately you're trying to drive someone to make a payment, but they can't make a payment on a letter. So they either got to go to a website or they got to make a phone call. And so like, what are you doing to be able to collect that information? I think that's interesting.
And yet at the same time, we don't want to shortchange collectors either, right? But the reality is, in my agency, 50% of right parties paid, but only 0.75% of people we called pick up the phone. And so, we're paying for people to sit and wait, and you spinning the dialer and all that sort of thing. And now you're bringing payers to the collector. I'm sure there's some middle ground there where, your debt collector isn't going to go from making 40 grand to 120 grand a year simply because they got onto the triage unit of inbound calls. And so I think everybody's going to have to look at their compensation models and make sure their best people are still being paid the most money in some way, shape, or form.
Well, compensation is always a challenge. We did just have a question come through on the chat here that I'll read for you guys, because I don't necessarily have the answer, but I'm curious. And that's, are each of these conversational responses programmed for the bot considered pre-recorded messages in terms of the TCPA?
So conversational AI is not a fixed recording, right? So the conversation that a bot would have with you versus with Mark or myself, there are going to be different elements to that conversation. So it is fluid and it's real time. It's not pre-recorded or predetermined. Yes, there are responses, from the consumers that will drive the conversation a certain direction. But the factual elements of the conversation, which are pertinent to the debt, that's not a pre-recorded element. The voice is a synthetic voice, and by all understanding of the TCPA, and we've worked closely with Mike Frost in the industry. He wrote a white paper on our behalf for skit.ai, and the technology in general. It is, in our view, it's compliant with the TCPA.
Fair. And to be perfectly frank, I mean, that's generally, I would say, talk to a legal counsel if you
Absolutely
need legal
right.
advice. But I appreciate that response, because it's not just an if this, then that response. Now I'm playing this message and listening to the response. There's a fluid operating statement there, which I think is interesting. Now, I guess the next thing that I wanted to cover, gentlemen, and we've only got about 8 minutes left in our presentation here, is what the future of debt collections looks like in terms of the technology stacks and the growth of the industry itself. So let me kick this off by saying, Mark, what are you seeing in terms of the industry growth? Do you see, what actually, let me rephrase that and say, what do you predict based on everything that you're seeing in the economy, in the marketplace, from your chair? What do you think the future of the industry holds?
Well, I think at the macro level, we'll continue to see a reduction in the number of collection agencies, and probably along with that, an increase in the average size of agencies. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Might be like they've always been. Maybe I'm tired of the regulations and I want to get out. Maybe I'm older and I want to retire. Maybe I'm just, it's no fun anymore. Whatever the case may be. Or maybe somebody made me a really good offer to sell my agency, and by golly, the best time to sell an agency is when someone else wants to buy it. So, I'm out. And so I think agencies are going to continue to get bigger and bigger, which means different things for different size agencies. If I'm on the small end and I'm successful, and I continue to exist and I want to continue on, I'm probably going to be a toe dipper when it comes to some of these technologies, because I've got a lot of money already invested in things, and maybe I don't want to be on the bleeding edge. But if I'm one of the behemoth companies out there, chances are they're doing this themselves internally already. So what about everybody else in the middle? I think this technology it's a must. It's not a want-to anymore. People are good. It's 5 years from now, if you're going to be in this industry and you have any hope of growing, you have to grow without the commensurate number of people that would normally have been added in the past in the future. To me, that is an absolute. And the question is, how quickly can I and do I want to get there?
Fair statement. I think when it comes to growth, from my chair, I look at the industry and I say, okay, clearly there's a bubble in the economy right now. We saw that at the RMAI keynote this year, where TransUnion presented their consumer data and talked about what's happening over a period of time, with accounts and delinquencies rising and balances rising and savings dropping. I mean, there's a lot of indicators right now that tell us that there's an economic bubble that could burst at any moment. But what I learned from the 2008 situation, or recession, whatever we're calling it now, when I look at all that, I say, okay, we're in a position to where the volume of accounts is going to rise, the collectability of those accounts is going to fall. And so if we're going to have more accounts that are less collectible, we need to work on our efficiencies in order to maintain and sustain the growth trajectory that's going to happen based on the volume of accounts hitting the marketplace. But we're an essential part of a credit-based ecosystem. If we don't exist, interest rates go back to 1980s levels, because why should I lend to somebody if I can't collect? Right? It doesn't make any sense. So, we need to still be here to protect that. But with we've seen this inverse change between the volume of accounts and the collectability of those accounts. Now, COVID hit and the volume of the accounts went down, but the collectability went up, right? And now we're starting to see that shift come back again. The seesaw, as far as I'm concerned, the industry goes nowhere. We just have to maintain flexibility that enables us to leverage technology for those efficiencies in order for us to grow, survive, and thrive into the future.
Well, and if my memory serves right, back then, say 2008-ish, is really when portfolio segmentation really got popular, because I knew I couldn't work I couldn't work more accounts the same way and collect half as much as the past. Now we look at it's not as easy as segmentation anymore. Now it's going to be which technologies will help me further segment my accounts and better serve those accounts in a more consistent and more regulatorily accurate manner than in the past. So it's no longer just butts and chairs and file segmentation. Now it's almost like the Rubik's Cube now became three-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're definitely playing 4D chess at this point. I mean, there's no question about it, which brings me to kind of our last slide here. I know we've only got a few minutes left in our presentation, but this is something that I find to be incredibly important when we talk about artificial intelligence, and that's one, that the bots are not coming, and that right, like, it's not Terminator 2. I did find out the other day, and this shocked me, that Terminator 2 is the prequel to Matrix. Had no idea about that until I saw an interview the other day, and I went, wow, that actually is all starting to make a lot of sense. Wow. But saying that the bots are not coming, there's one thing that I want to talk about with ChatGPT. And if you guys have not seen this yet, I highly suggest that you do a search and just go into Google and write ChatGPT and do anything now, or Dan. Okay, do anything now. And that command apparently broke the safety and security layer of the ChatGPT platform and enabled it to say and do things that broke the guardrails. And what I want to point out there is, well, that's a hot topic in the news right now and everybody's talking about it. That's not the kind of artificial intelligence that we're deploying here. And that's not what we're talking about, to where the safety and security layer can be breached. That is a far more crazily advanced type of learning algorithm that even those in the AI business are trying to slow it down. So I think as we see that, I'm going to call it negativity in the news about AI, I think it's important that people understand that that is not the type of artificial intelligence that's being deployed in the collections industry. No. That's not what we're here to do.
No, not at all. You're exactly right. So this whole concept of AI, it's like this buzzword, right? What's AI? Mm-hmm. What does that mean? I mean, we've spent a good deal of time talking about what it means here, but yeah, I mean, I think when people hear AI, they think Terminator, they think ChatGPT, they think these things, that they're hearing and seeing. We're not talking about that. That aspect has a lot of input that it's taking and things. What we're talking about, the technology that we're speaking of with conversational AI, has limited input, right? So it's not tapped into the web where it's going to now start trying to think about how to solve, a collection problem. Not yet.
Yeah, agreed. It's right. It's a much more, I mean, look, there's guardrails set up. It's not plugged into things it shouldn't be plugged into, and it doesn't have access to information. It's focused on solving one particular task, which I think is also really interesting about the way that skit.ai has kind of performed and been laser focused on one particular industry, because it allows you to learn the guardrails from a compliance perspective, the guardrails from a technology perspective. But I'm assuming it also shortens the onboarding ramp to get something up and running. Right, like to get something to the point in which it's actually usable. Like we talked about, the cost and time required to execute on some of these things can be significant. So I think that this is I think it's an interesting opportunity now to remain laser focused and perfect a particular craft.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you everybody for watching today. Gentlemen, I really appreciate your time and attention today. I always do enjoy a conversation with you guys. I look forward to seeing you at an upcoming event this year. I'm sure I'll see you at either at one of these conferences, whether it be CRS or ACA or Summit or whatever it is. I look forward to spending some time in person. For anybody that's watching, if you have additional questions that you'd like to ask, we'll be posting a replay of this on YouTube. You can either send us an email through the Demio platform where you're watching this video now, or you can check us out on YouTube and LinkedIn when the video gets posted later this week. But gentlemen, in the short term, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you guys.
Good to be on, Adam. Thanks. Take care, Scott.
It's fantastic. Thank you very much.
See you guys soon.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.